Did you know you can use some very basic card making supplies to make your very own customized pattern backgrounds? Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca Keppel. In today's video, I'm going to use basic shape stamps, a die, and then image stamps to create my very own patterns in the colors that I want to use for those cards. If you have supplies like this, you can follow along and create your own patterns too. But today, I'm going to be using different Catherine Pooler designs, stamps, dies, and inks to create my pattern backgrounds. First up, let's start by creating patterns with some basic shape stamps. This is the Catherine Pooler Love and Pieces stamp set, and you can see they have some basic shapes like rectangles and circles and lines. What's unique about this stamp set is that everything is very organic. It's not straight, harsh lines on anything. It's got a very flowy movement to it, which makes for unique patterns. So you can absolutely use your squares, circles, whatever basic shapes you have. I really like this set for a kind of retro/modern look to those patterns. Of course, when I'm using Catherine Pooler inks, I pull out both my swatches of color combinations and my color wheels to come up with some fun new color combinations to use. So I'm going to use the Love and Pieces stamp set with some different color combinations. This time I'm using Do-Si-Do, and I do like to, when it's a large image like this, double stamp it to get a full smooth impression. Now, lots of times with Catherine Pooler inks, if you haven't used them too much, I probably have to refill Do-Si-Do. I definitely have to refill Cummerbund, which is my next color that I'm using. So if you have a really juicy pad, you might not need to stamp them twice, but I always do to get the smoothest impression all the time, especially when you're creating a background or a pattern like this. You don't want a bunch of white spots showing through. You want to make it look like you're using a piece of pattern paper. Just a really easy combination, and doing the same thing in the upper right corner as the bottom left corner kind of gives that symmetry to it. Here I'm using the three little lines. Now this is something that I saw on Catherine Pooler's website in one of the card examples. They used these three little lines to make a rainbow, and I loved that idea. So I am just going to do the same exact thing here. If you don't have a rainbow of inks, you can overlap some of your stamping to create some new colors. I definitely recommend, if you love a type of ink, to get at least one color of each from the rainbow, and that allows you to do things like this, creating your own rainbow side border pattern there. I wanted to make sure to use all the stamps in the Love and Pieces stamp set. This is a little row of circles where half the circle is solid image and half the circle is outline. Again, just a really unique way to include a circle image in a stamp set. So I'm going to create a line across the middle of an A2 piece of white cardstock, and I am using some Tranquil ink for the light blue there and some Melon Ice for that kind of lime green. And then I'm just going to put those little dots, they have a little smattering of dots on each end above and below the circle line. So really easy ways to create some patterns, just kind of repetition and keeping things possibly symmetrical in some cases to make it look like an actual piece of pattern paper. Now I'm going to use the thicker lines, and this time I'm sticking with one color. This is the minted color, and I am making sure to line up this card against the left edge of my MISTI, and then I'm moving it up enough to be able to restamp without having to move the stamp, except for that last one. That last one I had to move the stamp because I ran out of real estate in the MISTI there. Okay, and then this little circle of dots is fun to add in lots of different places. Next up, I'm going to use one of the large solid image circles, and I've showed this in cards before to create an organic background on a card. You can just stamp a solid image stamp multiple times and create that background. I'm using a Catherine Pooler block here because the image itself is kind of organic and unique and not a completely round circle. It's okay if not every stamped image is perfect. So give yourself some grace if you just want to get this done quickly and just get in there and make some fun patterns, because once you've created all these pattern backgrounds, they turn into cards very quickly. So just have some fun with both color and these unique stamped images to create some fun patterns. Now, let's use a fun shaped die that's small enough to use multiple times across a card to create a fun, unique pattern. So for the die, I'm going to use Catherine Pooler's Suncatcher die. It cuts out this kind of rounded hexagon, and then inside the hexagon cuts out all these different triangles and then a circle in the center. So you could see, you could use the triangles to create a pattern. You could use the star that's created by the triangles and the circle in the center to create a pattern. I'm going to use that whole shape. So I'm going to cut it out multiple times. I ink blended a background, and now I'm going to adhere it down one on top of the other so that it is symmetrical. So the same amount will be hanging off the top of the card as is hanging off the bottom of the card. And once the glue is dry enough that it's not going to slide around, I'm going to go in and put one on each side as well. So again, with that idea of symmetry, I'm going to do everything symmetrical. So same on top, same on bottom, same on left, same on right. So I'm putting the corner of one of the hexagons in between where the two hexagons meet and make a corner as well. Once that's done and those are dried, I can turn it over and snip off the excess. Definitely use a pair of non-stick scissors here if you have any glue that's still a little wet or is just sticky. Once that's done, I have some open spaces left, and I'm going to use the pieces that I cut off to fill those up. So I'm not putting glue on the whole thing. I'm trying to just figure out how much adhesive I need to just adhere down the spot that I need to cover up those corners. Once those two corners were dry, I tried very hard to cut as little as I could so that I might be able to use these pieces on the bottom corners. But once I flipped it back over and tried to place those into those corners, it wasn't going to fill up the whole thing. So I did have to cut one more die cut, and then again, just use a little bit of liquid adhesive to just put some glue on the back where it's going to touch the card. Once that's dry enough that it's not going to slide around, now you can flip this over and then just carefully cut around the corners here, and I'll still have plenty of left of this shape for that other corner, and that will complete the entire pattern, which is the whole idea here, is to create this pattern. So it may seem like this took a long time, but it really didn't, because the shape is large enough that it's filling a decent amount of the card, and it's so unique once it's done. I've basically created my own panel die, essentially, that has this pattern across the whole A2 card. You all know you can use basic shape stamps or basic shape dies to create a pattern on a card. But what about using an image stamp to create that pattern? Let's try that next. I love this little set from Catherine Pooler. It's called Planted. You can get stamps and you can get dies that cut out all these potted plants. And I just thought these are so cute. I'm going to use them for some of the cards that I create on my pattern paper, but I wanted to use them to create their own pattern as well. So for this first pattern, I chose one of the stamps from the stamp set, a cute little potted plant. And I've treated the cardstock with anti-static powder, and I'm using Versamark ink, and I'm using a Catherine Pooler block to stamp this image multiple times across the cardstock like we did with the circle stamp. This is a little more complicated because you have to kind of see where you stamped and the ink is clear, so it can be a little dicey. But I got pretty close to creating the entire pattern. This time I am using gold embossing powder on top. I did want to put a couple stamped off the side, and then I did have that big white space in the middle. So I reset some of the areas with that anti-static powder and then restamped some images with the Versamark ink. And then I am just going to heat set this whole entire panel and turn all of that powdery looking gold into smooth metallic gold. For the next pattern, I'm using a large acrylic block from Catherine Pooler. It's a nice square large block, and I've set up several of the potted plant stamps on that block in a way that they each kind of have a little bit of space around them. And then I'm going to stamp them with a light colored ink. I'm using Tranquil again. It's a really light, pretty blue. So once I got that image down, now I'm going to fill in the top and the bottom. You don't have to ink up the whole stamp or the whole block, obviously. You can just ink up the top of the stamps just so that you can hang it off the bottom. And then I'm going to do the same things with the sides. This is going to make it look like it's an actual piece of pattern paper and that it's repeated. So this is really easy to do, especially if you use a light colored ink. It won't show any of the mistakes or things that just don't stamp perfectly when you're using a block. So this is two ways to use an image stamp to create those patterns. Okay, now let's turn these patterns into cards. For this one, I just stamped in black and white, "Thanks for your hospitality," and a potted plant. I'm going to do the same exact thing on this one, only I'm going to turn it on its side so that it's a horizontal card rather than a vertical card. So this one says "Happy Housewarming," and then again, I'm stamping the pattern, the plant, right on the pattern there. So that's two different ways you can use it, off to the side or right on the pattern. This time I am matting the pattern on some coordinating cardstock. I just happen to have some that match that melon ice really, really well. I'm going to use another piece of the cardstock to stamp one of the potted plants in Versamark ink, and this time I'm going to cover it in white embossing powder because that's really going to connect this color combination with the color combination of the pattern. It's got the white, it's got the melon ice, and then it's got that Tranquil blue. So this time I just stamped "Just for You" in the white space next to the pattern, and I popped up that little plant hanging right over top of that pattern that we created. Again, this time I'm just going to add a sentiment. It just says, "Don't stay away too long." So once you have these pattern papers, you can just stamp sentiments, you can stamp an image in a sentiment, but they really do come together quickly. I did cut that one down so I could mat it on some coordinating cardstock. For this one, I just stamped in black ink right over the middle of that pattern paper. It still pops because I used light colors in the background. Just something to think about when you're creating your patterns, depending on what kind of look you're going for. Again, here with all those plants in that Tranquil ink, it really does make a nice subtle look in the background. So I'm going to do a band of cardstock color that seems to really match, and then I'm going to stamp a sentiment, cut it down, and mat it on a little bit of gold mirror cardstock so that I can pop that up on the band in the center. So if you do have any mistakes, a little band for your sentiments or for an image is a perfect way to cover them up. This one, actually, I don't think there were that many mistakes, but it ended up just looking really cute and tying the whole card together. Moving on to one of the backgrounds that we created with the image stamp. This is the one with the gold embossed potted plants. So I stamped the sentiment in kind of some white space that I had left there. That was a perfect amount for that sentiment. It says, "Love that you're here." And now I'm just going to use some Karen markers. I was going to do a little bit more watercoloring with the pots, but because I had this on Nina Solar White cardstock, it doesn't have a lot of movement to it. So what you can do is you can use a little bit of water first and then put your Karen marker down if you do want to watercolor on this paper, or you can just put a little bit of color down on both sides and in the center, and then just use a teeny tiny bit of water just to make it look a little watery. So the other thing that you can do is on a glass mat or another protective surface, you can scribble the marker down and then add some water to that. And that will give you a nice watercolor look, even if you're working on Nina Solar White or some other type of cardstock that doesn't allow the ink to move very much at all. So that's what I did for the leaves there. And just a little bit of coloring adds a nice touch to those gold embossed looks. For the pattern created with the die, I'm going to stamp a plant and a sentiment in some alcohol-friendly ink, and then I'm going to heat set it because I want to color it right away. I'm using the Arteza Everblend markers, not really doing a lot of fancy blending and shading, especially for the leaves. I just put a light color down and then a dark color over the veins. For the pot, I kind of wanted a unique look with some pink and some yellow and a little bit of orange to kind of go with that ink blended background that I created there. So I'm going to pop up the sentiment. I'm going to lay it right over the seam of some of those die cuts that create the background. And then I'm going to let the pot be popped up and the leaves will just kind of go right over that sentiment. Really simple and easy, but such a fun, unique look. So these are all the cards I was able to quickly pull together once I had created all my unique patterns. I hope you'll look at some of your stamps and dies a little differently to create some patterns with them. And if you're interested in the Catherine Pooler design stamps and dies that I shared today, those supplies will all be linked down in the YouTube description box below the video. As always, I want to thank you so much for stopping by and spending time with me today. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you again soon. What are you doing at my desk, Cole? There you are. There you are. Oh, so cute.